Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video. My name is Christina and I love the baby whisperer Tracy Hogg. I talk about her in most of my videos and I talk about my experience doing her book and her methods on my two daughters. Right now I have a almost 2-year-old and an 8-week-old, and so I've been just updating y'all on essentially how everything is going with doing Tracy Hogg's methods with my 8-week-old. So in this video, I want to talk about basically the last 8 weeks and the 3 biggest problems I had with my daughter. They all pertain to sleep because obviously when we have a newborn, sleep is like the biggest thing on our minds. And essentially I want to talk about these problems, why they happen, and what I did to fix them. So if you experience these issues, then hopefully I can help you figure out the best way to go about fixing them with your baby. Now, these particular issues aren't necessarily mentioned in her book, but the way I go about fixing them is all based on her methods and how she would probably recommend it as well. So the first sleep issue that I came across with my daughter was this issue of her waking up at night and essentially doing this whole wake window in the middle of the night. So she would wake up for like a feed at like 2 a.m. and then I'd feed her, but she would still be wide awake afterwards, and she would essentially, her wake window would be like an hour and she'd have to be awake for the full hour before she would get tired enough for me to actually be able to put her back to bed. And this was really only an issue that I saw in the first like month or so of her life, but it was definitely an issue I had to work to correct, because if you didn't work to correct it, then it would just continue. And so the reason why this happens, if you experience your baby just being awake in the middle of the night, even if it's just like one wake window, is because they aren't tired enough to go back to sleep. So you have this issue of balancing their daytime and nighttime sleep, as well as making sure they're getting enough wake time during the day. And so where my issue laid was in the fact that I wasn't giving my daughter enough wake windows throughout the day to essentially be awake for enough time before we officially went to bed. So she would have to do an additional wake window at some point, and it would just end up being at night. And obviously at the beginning, newborns are very sleepy. So essentially what was happening was during one of her feeds, she would fall asleep pretty easily afterwards, and I would put her down instead of trying to encourage her to stay awake for a full wake window. So I just had to identify which feed that was essentially and make sure that I actually did my best to try to encourage her to stay awake for as long as she could before her next nap. And that is definitely tricky at the beginning because they seem so tired and sleepy and you want them to nap more, but you really don't want to exchange their daytime wakeness for nighttime wakefulness. You really want them to get all of their sleep, or the majority of their sleep, at night. The way that you can best solve this problem, if you have it yourself, is by tracking everything that you do. So tracking all of her naps, and essentially when you track naps, and you also track wake windows. So between 0 to 8 weeks, possibly beyond 8 weeks, they should be getting between 14 to 17 hours of sleep totally throughout a 24-hour period. So you need to see how much sleep they're getting. And if it's more than 17 hours, then obviously they're going to have a difficult time sleeping at night. And if it's less than 14 hours, that means they're sleep deprived. But it should be somewhere right in the middle. And even like my daughter's sweet spot is around the 15.5-hour mark. So she would be, if she pushes 16.5 hours, then she does a wake window in the middle of the night. So I would be tracking her naps during the day. I use an app that tells me how long she slept in the last 24 hours. So when I saw that number getting close to 16.5, I would know, okay, she needs to stay awake for another wake window before she can go to sleep, or else she's gonna wake up in the middle of the night. And essentially at this point, she was pretty young when this was a problem. So I was able to, in the middle of the night, put her back to sleep by shush patting her, and she would go back to sleep pretty easily because she was drowsy finally after an hour. But I would lay her in her bassinet until she was ready to go back to sleep. It was just frustrating because I essentially just had to wait for her to be tired enough. So I would lay in bed and just wait 30 more minutes or so until she started crying, and then I would be able to get up and shush pat her and then put her back to sleep. So if this is an issue, obviously you don't want to lean into this wakefulness. You don't want to turn on the lights. You don't want to stimulate them. You don't even want to like hang out with them. You want to put them back in bed to show them that that's where they're supposed to be during this time. You don't want to confuse them even more by keeping them up. And then this eventually would become a further issue where they might swap their days and nights, and that mostly becomes a problem if you let them take naps that are too long during the day. So that could also be a factor. It might not necessarily be the number of wake windows, but it could be that their naps are too long. So never ever, any age of child should never take a nap longer than 3 hours, especially at this age when they are very young. If they take a nap that's 3 hours or longer, then they are likely to switch their days and nights. And essentially, you know, if you're letting your baby sleep for longer than that, then that is your problem. Even if it's not a total day and night switch, they could just think that night starts at 1 a.m. instead of at 8 p.m. essentially. I personally try not to let my daughter go more than 2.5 hours if that ever happens. And I aim to make naps not longer than 2 hours at a time, just because it should be, you know, they should be fed every 3 hours during the day. They're usually awake for about an hour and then can go for a 2-hour nap. So it doesn't really make any sense for that nap to be longer at this point, unless your schedule is just a little bit messed up. Then I would allow it to go to 2.5 hours, but just not beyond that. Now, the second issue that I had to tackle with my daughter is this idea of 45-minute naps, or even 30 to 45-minute naps. And this is a really common issue that everybody with a baby experiences at some point, is you lay your baby down for a nap, you expect them to go hopefully an hour and a half to 2 hours, and yet they wake up at the 30 to 45-minute mark, somewhere in there, and it's difficult to put them back to sleep. This is just a developmental issue. It's going to happen no matter what to every single baby. They're going to do this at some point because that is the length of one sleep cycle. So while they are taking their nap, they're simply ending their whole sleep cycle, and they're supposed to go into another cycle of sleep and to continue their nap, essentially, to get that hour and a half long nap. That would be ideal, but they can't do it because they're just too young. And obviously they're too young to be sleep trained at this point. That is a huge goal of sleep training, is to help them link their sleep cycles independently. But at this age, they need help doing that. And also, a huge problem I see that other parents do is they see that their baby wakes up at this point, and then they just are like, oh, well, you're up, I guess you're not tired anymore, and they end that nap early. And that is not what you want to do. Especially this young, you can start laying good habits and start laying a foundation for your baby to learn how to connect those sleep cycles. So even though you can't fully teach them to do it independently, and they're going to struggle at times to do it on their own, you can help show them, hey, your nap's not over, you just need to go back to sleep. And that is how the 4S method will factor in. Obviously you do the 4S method when you put your baby down for a nap, but if they were to wake up early, then you would go in, and at this age you can pick them up and do the shush pat with them until they quiet down, lay them down, and then continue to shush pat them in their bed. And the goal is to get them to fall back asleep and to do a whole new sleep cycle. So you need to take the time to teach them to link those cycles together. And this was easy for me to do at the beginning because I knew what to do, but it's gotten a little more difficult recently because sometimes she just won't go back to sleep. And that happens. Sometimes when I try to go in there to shush pat her to do a longer nap, she doesn't fall back asleep, and it's just a constant, you know, shush pat, lay down. She does that for a while, wakes back up, and it can just feels like it goes on for a while. And if this does happen, I mean, it could be for a number of reasons, but we still want to encourage longer naps. The only naps where they should be doing one sleep cycle is during a cat nap, and that would be 1 or 2 cat naps in the evening depending on your baby's age. So if it's not supposed to be a cat nap, we want to take the time to encourage them to sleep longer. And what I've noticed with both of my daughters is whenever I did do that, whenever they woke up early and I went in there to shush pat them to help them go back to sleep and they didn't sleep, I would then end the nap still when it's supposed to be ended, or at least no more than 15 minutes before it's supposed to be over. and they would still do a whole wake window from when it was supposed to be over. So it actually won't mess up your routine if you do have a 3-hour routine going on and they only sleep for a 45-minute nap. The only way that you can mess up their routine is by actually just getting them up at the 45-minute mark. But if you can stay committed to trying to get them back down, even if they never fall back asleep, they could still do a whole hour wake window and help keep your schedule on track. This is probably not the case for every baby, but it has been the case so far for both of mine, so I would imagine that many other parents out there would find that their babies can still do a whole hour wake window after having a difficult nap. So obviously try it and do your best to see how you can put that effort in and help them sleep longer. Because in the end, when they do get older and their brains develop more and their circadian rhythm happens and they're able to soothe themselves better, they will be able to go and take a longer nap. It's definitely important to do it, and it will pay off in the end, even though it's hard work in, the midst of it. Now, the third issue that I had with my daughter was overtiredness at bedtime. And this is an issue I just fixed recently, but it probably was a problem for the last month, for like 4 straight weeks, where I was following the routine that Tracy Hogg has in the book. And it just happened that she, like when I was putting my daughter down when she was supposed to go down, she would not be able to fall asleep and she would get overtired. And it would just turn into this whole thing where it would take me twice as long to get her down for bed. And that would frustrate me because as soon as she's asleep and my toddler was already asleep, then that's when I can have my evening. And so this was a really difficult thing for me to navigate and to figure out exactly what the problem was. And so I want to put up on the screen right now just a comparison of Tracy Hogg's suggestion at 4 weeks for 4-week-olds versus her 8-week-old suggestion. And you can see obviously the difference is there in the evening. When your baby's able to be up for longer, then you want to do the more 8-week one. But in her 4-week one, she still has on there an 1.5 hour wake window for a 4-week-old. And I do not think that's age appropriate at all. My daughter was never able to do that. She would take that second cat nap at 7 p.m. and then she would wake up at 7:30 and then do a whole wake window then. I would feed her at 8 and then I wouldn't be able to put her back down until about 8:30 or so. And that's only if she actually fell asleep at 7. Sometimes she would just get so worked up and overtired in the evening that she would miss that second cat nap. And then I would feed her close to 8 and she would just fall asleep right after that because she was so tired. And I knew that that was bad. But I don't think, really, at least for my daughter, this 4-week schedule was not a good recommendation for her, especially in the evenings. This was really our only problem with her at this point. And so I couldn't really complain, but it wasn't good for her, and it took me weeks to figure out why. And the reason, at least with my daughter, is that she needs to not have her last feed before bed like associated with bedtime. It needs to be like a full feed at least an hour before she goes to bed. Because if she does start, if I keep her up, if I wake her up from her cat nap and then she's up for like an hour and then eats, she gets more overtired that way because when she eats, she's exerting more effort and she's already tired and towards the end of her wake window, and then that just stimulates her more. So I've learned that even though, I'm technically doing an earlier feed, I need to feed her earlier, like at 6, and then start her bedtime at 7 to have her down by 7:30. And she can totally do that now, which is great that I figured that out. But it was just kind of a weird thing. And so I don't know if this 4-week schedule would work well for somebody else, even with small little tweaks. But my suggestion, if you're having a problem like this, especially when it comes to overtiredness at bedtime, which is when we really want our babies to go down the most probably, then just tweak some things and figure out what exactly works best for your child. Don't feel like you have to follow exactly what's on paper and what's recommended, but just do things that are age appropriate for them and that are temperament appropriate as well, and that follow your child and not necessarily what should happen. Right, so those were the 3 biggest problems that I tackled in these last 8 weeks, and I just wanted to add a bonus thing in here, which is sleeping through the night. And that is a question that most parents ask at the beginning, is when is my baby going to sleep through the night? And you should start to see that hopefully around 8 weeks. Both of my daughters actually slept through the night for the first time ever when they were 7 weeks and 3 days old, both of them. And so I think that's funny that it happened on the same day and the same exact age. With my oldest daughter, I did not do Tracy Hogg at this point, and so it just happened. I was trying to wake her up at the same time every day, and I gave her a bedtime, and I was doing a dream feed, but I didn't do anything else with her. She just napped whenever, ate whenever during the day, and she still slept through the night by that time. And then with this daughter, it obviously we've been doing Tracy Hogg stuff with her since birth. And she did the same thing. So hopefully you will just naturally start to see your baby sleeping through the night at this point. If you don't yet, then it should happen by 12 weeks at least, once or twice here or there. It might not be consistent until closer to 12 weeks. But what we want to do is encourage that consistency. So the best way to get your baby to sleep through the night is to feed them as much as possible during the day. So making sure every feed they take is a full feed, and you do that by spacing them 3 hours apart, because feeding them less than 3 hours apart will make them just snacks and they won't be taking full feeds. So we want them to take in a full feed and be well fed. You can cluster feed in the evening, like in the 4-week sample schedule, to tank them up essentially for the night, and then do a dream feed as like a last feed to get them through the night. When we say sleeping through the night at this age, that means 8 hours. A baby at this point cannot sleep longer than 8 hours. Maybe they could go 9, but we're not looking at 12 hours yet. So that's why a dream feed is recommended, because then it can get them to the morning. So I usually dream feed around 10:30. You should do it between 10 and 11 p.m. But I do 10:30, and then my daughter sleeps until 7, and I wake her up at 7, and she could probably go a few minutes longer. But she's starting to do it more consistently, and it's not every night, but some nights she does need like a 5 a.m. feed because she can't totally go the whole way, but we're working on making sure she does. So just remember at this age that food and sleep are very, very closely intertwined, and if they are waking up at night, it's usually because they're hungry. So if they are waking up because they're hungry, then really stressing full feeds during the day and possibly a cluster feed in the evening is what's going to help your baby sleep through the night. If your baby's not sleeping through the night, but they're also not hungry, then you might have another issue. So when they wake up at night, if they're not hungry, you need to watch the way you put them back to sleep. And that's why, we recommend the 4S method, because that will help them not develop a sleep prop. So if you're using a pacifier, if you're rocking, if you're even using a breast to get them back to sleep when they're not hungry and they don't need it, then you're teaching them a bad habit. And you want to watch out around this age, because they might start to wake up at night and not be hungry. And if you're used to just feeding them at night, then you're going to develop that bad habit, and they might be more encouraged to wake up at night when they don't have to. I would say this is probably an issue closer to 12 weeks, because I would assume that most of the time when they wake up around this age, they are actually hungry. But you just want to watch and make sure they actually are hungry before you do feed them. And if you see any other issues that are preventing your baby from sleeping through the night, then hopefully they can also be fixed by the way we address things in this video. For example, if your baby's doing a full wake window at night, if they swapped their days and nights, then obviously I talked about that earlier, so that could be an issue as well. But developmentally, it is very age appropriate for a baby that was not born premature to be able to sleep 8 hours by 8 weeks of age. And you really want to encourage that. You want to encourage it to continue, because I have friends even who have had that happen, and then they haven't encouraged their child to continue to sleep 8 hours at night and have ended up with night wakings later on. So just because your baby's doing it and it kind of seems like they're doing it on their own doesn't mean they're going to keep doing it on their own. We really have to keep pushing them to continue that habit of sleeping consistently 8 hours, and then hopefully that will turn into 12 hours by 7 months. That's how long it takes to get to 12 hours. I hope that this video was very helpful and informative for you guys who have little newborns out there and you're trying to get some sleep. If you have any further questions, or if you're dealing with a sleep problem that I did not talk about here and you're not sure how to address it, please feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to help you out, help you get sleep as soon as possible. Feel free to subscribe so you can stay updated when more videos come out. I'm trying to kind of update y'all on my baby's progress every 2 weeks or so. So if you have a baby around the same age, you can subscribe to stay updated to see if I bring up any issues that might help you with your issues. Thanks for watching.